Greetings! Hegel on the beach, back in Bootle Semogs. I've been to so many beaches and I could have done this video, but I've come here instead. Okay, let me just straighten this up a little bit. Okay, for you. Right, okay. So the last time we did the Romans and the rise of reason put a question mark over the spontaneous but the very fragile spirit or ethical totality, let's call it the mentality, the social mentality of the ancient Greek city-states. Okay, Socrates was killed because he used reason to question the basis of everything that the Greeks had taken for granted. So he questioned the ideological, or rather the theological basis of the Greek city-states, um, and membership of the Greek community was based upon the worship of the gods. So maybe theology, he questioned theology, that's the right word. Um, the participatory ideal, which we talked about last time, of ancient Greece was replaced by the spectator perspective. Of ancient Rome, where only the emperor was free, and Rome replaced the natural impulsive nature of Athens with and the ideas of Greek citizenship tied to the city and the gods with the dead Roman autocracy. However, Rome did do something interesting with the concept of property. And we mentioned before, while life was being choked out of the impetuous, um, the free spirit of the ancient world, the Romans, with the help of the law, developed the concept of the person. But more specifically, what I mean by that is legal personhood. So this video series is about Hegel's book, of course, Phenomenology, and there are two English translations of the title of the book we need to consider. The book's called Phenomenology of Mind. Sorry, Phenomenology of Spirit or Phenomenology of Mind, okay? So, and I'm no expert in the translation, but the words spirit and mind seem to be interchangeable. Um, Now, Hegel is using the title of this work. It's got to do with, it's not individual mind, it's collective mind. Because for Hegel, a single mind isn't possible. The mind must be social. It cannot exist on its own. So I'll give you an example before this car goes past. Okay, so I want to give you an example. So I was arguing with a drunken person the other day, right? And it was unavoidable. I didn't choose to do it. And I was in an environment where people are like shouting at you and arguing. And you know that famous phrase, which is, don't argue with stupid people because you're reduced to their level. That's a really Hegelian statement, because what it is, if you're talking to someone who is, as a joke, mental, that means it was saying to you, hey lad, what are you doing? Shut up, will you? How are you doing that? You can't use all of the things that we, perhaps, sophisticated, intelligent people, you just can't use them. It doesn't work. If you're arguing with someone like that, forget about it. So all the sophistication in the world goes up because it's social. It doesn't matter what's in your head. Nothing can get out of it, because when you communicate with that person who might be drunk or aggressive or whatever, nothing works. Yeah, occasionally you might get away with it using reason, but it doesn't work essentially for most people. If you're, for example, go to a penal colony and you try Hegelian shit on someone, it isn't going to work, or Kantian or whatever it is, analytical philosophy, it's not going to work. So we have to accept that the mind is a social achievement. And that means it has to work under certain social circumstances. It can't work outside that. So that's what I mean when you can interpret the title of Hegel's work. That's what I mean by that. It's a social, it's an achievement. And it's come into being, but it can be taken away as well. Very quickly, just go talk to a drunk. That's my advice for a long time. And also make sure you can't leave, and you'll see how quickly your mind, your sophisticated Western mind, it disappears if you're from the West. Okay. So before Hegel, and there is a point in my talking about drunk, before Hegel, how did thinkers perceive this mysterious thing called the mind? And how is it linked to spirit? Because I'm suggesting there's a separation. So the spirit of ancient Greece that we've been talking about, what's the link? Okay, so Hegel famously referred to perhaps spirit as the I that is the we and the we that is the I. And that's to describe the truth about mind, modern mind, I think. So we can't have an I without a we. We can't have individuality in the Enlightenment sense without society, and neither can we have a society without an individual. The individual I should say. So modernity means we aren't ants. But at this point, let's look at the individual mind and see how Hegel's ideas are a radical shift from what went before. So the idea of mind and individual were almost, I think, coextensive. Pre-Hegel, we were individual decision makers. Now, I could be wrong on that, but that's my humble take on this Hegel moment, one of the takes on it. Okay, the individual mind. So we'd reached the idea of persona in Roman law, and that referred to the individual human in relationship to legal matters. That was the big Roman achievement. So later, persona referred to all bearers of rights and duties, including corporative bodies. Okay, remember last time Mitt Romney said people are corporations are people too, and he was legally, technically right. So the idea of the individual human as a bearer of rights and duties, that's a Roman achievement, but it also had an influence on the Christian tradition in relation to natural law. But Christianity and Rome diverge. Christian dogma, doctrine, it rejected the Roman idea of persona. Instead, it defined the person. It did move away from it, and it did individualize the person, but it was different. Okay, it defined a person as an individual, rational substance. So the Romans are saying it's legal right, it's bearer. They're saying, the Christians are saying it's a magical substance, not magical, rational substance, which is a bit magical. Christian doctrine until 1700 was dominated by something called scholasticism, which kind of gets a bad name, doesn't it? So it's a mixture of Aristotle and Aristotelian and Catholic methodology. So I won't go into it here, but that's kind of what centuries of Christianity was. So Christian theology was concerned with heaven and hell, of course, how you got there. So do something good, heaven. Do something bad, and the other place, hell. So, and of course, we know that there's a celestial scorecard up there somewhere with a personal record of our own personal individual good deeds and bad deeds. And that was one reason why defining who and what the person is and what personal responsibility is was important for Christians. And that's why kind of it was an achievement as well to have this record keeping of who we are, sins and good deeds. So medieval disputes about personhood also arose out of problems relating to the doctrine of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Okay, you know the famous hymn, the name of the we all know this, and the Son and the Holy Spirit, Amen. Okay, so hymns, when I learned at primary school, echo this three people in one. For example, there was a song I remember singing it. If you go to that tree there in the house, I remember singing it to myself after I'd been to primary school. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, blessed Trinity, on the day I was baptized, came to live in me. That's like, God knows how many years I've remembered that hymn from. But that was, the Spirit comes, it's a person. Okay, with the Trinity, we've got one God, it's got a single divine nature, but there are three persons. I'm using the word persons and not people, okay? Three persons. Each person has an identical essence, okay? So, you're going to know this, of course. The Council of Florence, 1431 to 1449, is a long council. Well, not a long time, 14 years talking about this. But they came up with this formulation. They said, these three persons are one God and not three gods, for the three are one substance. Yeah, keyword substance. One essence, keyword essence. One nature, one Godhead, one infinity, one eternity, and everything in them is one where there is no opposition of relationship. So this very difficult concept of Trinity that children like me are encouraged to sing about, without understanding what it is really, that's been around for a long time. It was around a long time before the Council of Florence. It went back to the early church fathers. Okay, and it sounds rather ridiculous, but it's an important part of the development of personhood, and we still use that. I suggest that that concept of having two persons in one body, it works. It actually works. It's not a fanciful idea, but we'll come to it. Okay, so there are three divine persons according to Christians in one being. So personhood doesn't necessarily mean the complete essence of a being. Okay, so you have the essence of a being and personhood. How do we match them up and how do we distinguish them? Okay, so around 500, okay, Boethius, he adapted Aristotle's persona, okay, to refer to a first substance whose essence involved rationality. So that means a person is the individual substance of a rational nature. That's how his definition is. Okay, a person is a rational substance. Okay, he defined the Trinity as one essence, three substances, and three persons of a Godhead. Like the Council of Florence, I should say, 1,000 years later, Boethius had similar type of concept. So persona also applied to individual human beings consisting of soul and body, not of soul or body separately. But what makes a human person is, according to Boethius, not their body, but their rationality. That's what this substance is, rationality. So as I said before, the Roman idea of person as role and pertaining to legality and rights, it isn't there from 500 AD onwards, but it still hangs around the fringes and will come. So the idea that soul is rationality, this is hugely significant because these theological deliberations from medieval scholars about persona, these are the foundations of the modern concept of a person. Whatever we think of the naivety and so on, and they influence the way even today we talk about the law and the constitutions of nations and human rights. In fact, you'll find that constitutional experts and person responsibility, these are deeply interconnected and really important debates that need to be had. Okay, so like Boethius, Thomas Aquinas saw rationality as the main characteristic of persons. Okay, so this is what Aquinas says. He says, among all other substances, individual human beings with a rational nature have a special name, and this is person, he says. And because of their rationality, persons are substances which have control over their actions and act on their own initiative, Aquinas. So for Aquinas, a human person is synonymous with an individual human being, body and soul. And continuing a bit further with this theological moment, personal human identity and life after death, for example, we're going to talk about that. This is why it's important. Okay, so philosophers and theologians appreciated if we aren't the same person after death as we are in this life, then life doesn't really make sense. Because according to Christian doctrine, I mean, this is sort of almost common sense, we're rewarded or punished by God according to what we do in this life. And our fate in the afterlife, when we get to heaven or hell, that's just only if the same person is punished or the same person is rewarded in the next life as this life. Okay, so if a total bastard in this life, I'm going to go to hell and I'll be rewarded for that. I won't be a different person in the next life. Okay, many of the discussions about the problems of personal identity in the 17th and 18th century focused on moral and legal issues. So a person being regarded as someone with rights and obligations to whom actions were attributed. That's the Roman concept. And so who is held responsible for those actions? So the Roman legacy, it still persisted alongside the Christian theology. The importance of sameness or the identity of the person wasn't just important for the afterlife, and it is important for the afterlife because if you've been naughty, you're going to go to hell. If you've been nice, you're going to heaven, and that's how people are living their lives for like centuries. And if that's your life, you go to a local village and you go to church all the time, and Christian theology is everywhere. Then that's what's going to determine your behaviour a lot of the time, isn't it? It's in your head constantly. So that's why the hereafter was important. But um, personal identity also applied to judgments in human courts of law. So I want to bring in John Locke here, who has a bit of a bad name, but he is really interesting because his essay, it's called An Essay Concerning Human Understanding, that was published in 1694. And that was a milestone, I think, anyway, in understanding what we meant by a person. And therefore, a milestone in understanding mind and personality, and individuality, I should say. So Locke suggested that personal identity had to do with something called, well, basically inner directed consciousness. So this is the concept of the individual coming to the fore. So we have to be conscious to be a person. That seems to be an important foundation. Of course, there's lots of other caveats for that. For example, if you are in a semi-vegetative state, or if you, for example, you might have autism, or you might have a brain disorder, that still qualifies you as a person. But let me take you through the argument about what Locke was saying. And okay, so he wrote this: you've got to be conscious to be a person. It is certain that Socrates asleep and Socrates awake is not the same person, but his soul when he sleeps, and Socrates the man, consisting of body and soul, when he is waking, are two persons. Since waking Socrates has no knowledge of or concernment for the happiness or misery of his soul, which it enjoys alone by itself while he sleeps, without perceiving anything of it, if a sleeping man thinks without knowing it, the sleeping and waking man are two persons. Okay, so that's where, from theology and about what we do in the afterlife will lead us to what we do now will lead to a wonderful afterlife, to court to law and your responsibility. This puts a question mark, doesn't it? Because when we're asleep and we're awake, we're two different people. We do all kinds of weird stuff in our sleep if you think about it. When we're dreaming, I mean, weird stuff. I don't say you don't, because you do. We all do weird stuff, and we're two different people. So that's Locke's argument. And also, we can't remember, can we? I know people claim they remember all these dreams, but mostly we just forget them, don't we? Pretty much immediately. The odds one we remember, and they're the usually freaky ones where we're doing stuff that we don't know what we're doing. We're not conscious of. Okay, so Locke introduces the idea of education and experience in forming a person. That's why he's important as well. Okay, generally speaking, before Locke, the soul was seen as an unchangeable substance. Okay, so Locke changes the conversation. Okay, so you have this soul, and it just is like a diamond, isn't it? Or like a dark pearl, and if you're evil, but it doesn't change. Okay, consciousness. This is what he says. Consciousness always accompanies thinking. And it is that which makes everyone to be what he calls self, and thereby distinguishes himself from all other thinking things. In this alone consists personal identity, i.e., the sameness of a rational being. And as far as this consciousness can be extended backwards to any past action or thought, so far reaches the identity of the person. It is the same self now it was then, and it's the same self with this present one that now reflects on it, that action was done. Consciousness makes personal identity. That's Locke, okay? So if you can remember it, that's you. That's who you are, okay? Any bad stuff, it's you. And the good stuff, that's you too. If you remember it. If you can't remember it, it's not you. Okay. The mind thinks in proportion to the matter it gets from experience to think about. Okay, so the person we are is not formed from a soul, it's formed from experience. That seems straightforward. It is passed out that the same man would at different times make different persons. I think it's so important. So important. Circumstances enormously make you who you are. It doesn't matter what your golden soul is, your jewel. If you are born into, it's the classic argument, isn't it? If you're born into like poverty and you're getting whacked around the house all the time, then that's going to affect who you are, what your personality is. Okay. So for Descartes, and this is important, the soul was the self. So forget about being beaten up around the house when you're a kid. The soul's you. And the body was something that was just merely happened to be joined to. So the soul preceded personality for Descartes. For Locke, personality is shaped by experience. Yeah. So that's Locke. That's why I think Locke's important. So for Descartes, on the contrary, the individuality of the soul is prior to the consciousness of thoughts. Okay, does that make sense? So Descartes is it's already there, this rational thing. Okay. So to make things even more complicated, let's bring in, and I'm not just name dropping this because I'm going, oh, Descartes, Locke, Spinoza, but as though but I want to bring in Spinoza. Okay. And I think he's, by the way, he's a great fella. And there's a great painting of him walking. He's being harangued in Amsterdam. I think it's Amsterdam. He's just a brilliant human being. Anyway, Spinoza argued the mind can neither imagine anything nor recollect past things except while the body endures. So Spinoza told this story about a Spanish poet who blacked out and he didn't remember anything of his past life. So it sounds sort of convincing, this. So Spinoza argued for that reason he wasn't the same man before the amnesia. I mean, you've seen loads of films about this, haven't we, about amnesiacs? What's the one where he wakes up? Oh, what's it called? Total Recall. Total Recall with Arnold Schwarzenegger, where he's actually an evil monster, and then he has a brain implant, thinks he's somebody else, and then he becomes that other person. So they're actually two persons in the Total Recall. That's maybe the way to look at it. Okay, so let's go back to Spinoza. So Spinoza said, away from Schwarzenegger. So the Spanish poet blacked out, remembered nothing of his past life, and he argued that for that reason, he wasn't the same person before the amnesia. So human identity, it requires continuity of memory, and that depends on the body. If the body is destroyed, the individual mind or person is destroyed. He argued that the human mind isn't eternal. So there seems to be a fair amount of agreement between Spinoza and Locke on this subject about, environment creating you, and there being no kind of eternal soul that is the key component of what we are. Anyway, Spinoza and Locke were contemporaries, exact contemporaries. They're both born in 1632. Descartes was actually before them. He was 1596. So that's the debate. That's the context that these debates are taking place in. Anyway, Christians believed in the 18th century, not only in the immortality of the soul, but also the resurrection of the body. Now, I think in Christian theology today, it's not so big that people just think about it being a spirit. But certainly in America, loads of people think we're going to be, dig up that grave over there and we'll be resurrected fully, with our desires for burgers and, boozing or whatever it is that we like to do in life. Okay. So, but there are all sorts of arguments about how the exact same body could be resurrected along with the soul. But basically, the same man or woman would rise again with pretty much the body that you've got. Okay, for Locke, though, man or woman and person denote distinct ideas. Locke says, if it be possible for the same man to have distinct incommunicable consciousness at different times, it is passed out the same man would at different times make different persons. So Locke rejected Descartes' view that the soul always thinks. He also argued that we can't be certain about the real essence of the soul. We know that we have the faculty of thought, but our knowledge doesn't go beyond the evidence of inner experience. Okay, he says this: when we see, hear, smell, taste, feel, meditate, or will anything, we know that we do so. Thus, it is always as to our present sensations and perceptions. For Locke, then, being conscious means an immediate awareness that is an essential part of thinking. And as we are conscious of hearing, smelling, feeling, then consciousness and personhood is firmly related to this world and not an immaterial world of souls. So for Locke, I don't know whether he believed in personal immortality, but he just didn't really he just parked that one, that idea of immortality. But anyway, for Locke, person or personality isn't about some kind of metaphysical idea of personality. He's interested in the concrete moral and legal responsibility of the human. So it's a more developed form of this Roman idea of a bearer of rights, okay? So Locke believed that punishment is annexed to personality. and personality to consciousness. And this means that actions of which I have no consciousness are not part of my personality, and consequently, I cannot be held responsible for them. So many theologians and philosophers still follow Descartes' line in identifying the person with the soul, and saw the soul as an immaterial substance. Okay, that was fine. Okay, Descartes thinks the soul is the conscious person, and Locke goes the other way. The conscious person is the soul. But David Hume, who came along a fair bit later than Locke, he came to a different conclusion to Locke concerning what we can know about our own minds. But there are a number of interesting similarities, I think. Okay, so make up your own minds. I'm making a judgment on this one. Okay. Like Locke, Hume argued against the existence of innate ideas and proposed that human knowledge derives solely from experience. Okay, so if you know you're human, that's a pretty straightforward position. So Hume says that inner experience exists, but this experience doesn't give us evidence of a self in the sense of a soul. Instead, we get a multiplicity of different perceptions. Hume says, I always stumble on some particular perception or other of heat or cold, light or shade, love or hatred, pain or pleasure. I never can catch myself at any time without a perception, and never can observe anything but the perception. So were my perceptions to be removed, I would be insensible of myself. That is to say, there would be no experiential evidence for my existence. And in this sense, I may truly be said not to exist. Okay, so according to Hume, all we can say on the basis of introspection is that the mind is nothing but a bundle or collection of different perceptions which succeed each other with an inconceivable rapidity and are in a perpetual flux and movement. So this is Hume's famous bundle theory, or bundle explanation of the consciousness of the mind. So now we come to Kant, okay? I'm not name dropping, okay? But Kant. So Kant's transcendental deduction of the categories seems to be a response to Hume's theory of mind. So Kant's utter brilliance and originality was to move the argument about mind away from experience to what makes experience possible. So I'll say that again. He moves the argument away from experience, so we've got Hume where the mind's just bring all kinds of stuff floating in the head, and he says Kant says what makes experience possible. How can we even begin to have any perceptions at all, or to make any sense, and I've made this I think in earlier videos, any sense of any perception without having something that's in place to gather these random experiences and perceptions together? So I'm hearing, touching, listening to, smelling a vast multiplicity of stuff. So behind me, there's all these trees. I've got these lovely, flowers here. There's cars driving past, as you can see. There's an aeroplane flying overhead. There's these fluff. It's all kinds of stuff going on. And these are all, with Hume, they're all floating. How can I make sense of them? How do I put them? Fly on my camera. Okay, so how can I make sense of that fly? It just came into my head, but how can I put them together in some kind of order? And why isn't the mind just a jumble or a bundle of incoherence? Because the bundle theory could mean, it's a bundle of nonsense. So Kant's categories make sense of the jumble. They don't give us knowledge of individual particular objects, but all objects must have one or more of the categories, his categories they're called, as one of its features. Now, if it's got to be an object of experience. So Kant proposed 12 categories. I might be wrong on this. So unity, plurality, and totality. That's for the concept of quantity. Reality, negation, and limitation for the concept of quality. Inherence and subsistence, cause and effect. And community for the concept of relation. Oh, possibility, impossibility, existence, non-existence, and necessity and contingency. Now, I think that's all of them. I don't necessarily know what all of them mean offhand, but they're the categories. That's what he said makes experience possible. Okay. So basically, these are conditions for experiencing objects in the world. and to stop sense impressions from overwhelming us. So the categories of Kant makes experience coherent, and Kant's answer is that we must presuppose a connecting thing, a self, which unifies qualities, quantities, sensations, and so on. Otherwise, we can't relate to any of these objects at all. We can't relate to any of the sensations that we're having. The understanding, as Kant describes it, rather than being an inner sense, provides the idea of a unitary self. The understanding supplies the forms that structure our experience of the sensible world. Okay, so the intelligible or noumenal world, he called it the noumenal world, what we can see, okay, that, oh, sorry, no, the, 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 the world is unknowable. So we can't know the world as it is. The point is that Kant further refines and criticizes the ideas of Hume, Locke, Spinoza, and Descartes. So he gets them all together. So he's saying we can't really know the world as it is, we can only know the appearances of the world. But anyway, these philosophers, Hume, Locke, Spinoza, Descartes, these philosophers are crucial stage and posts in humanity's voyage to what the mind is, the modern mind. And after Kant, we get to another historical turning point, which some people saw as the end of the line for philosophy. So this is Hegel, or Francis Fukuyama said the end of history. But whatever, everyone's always reached the end of history, and then some more history happens. Okay, but Hegel is supposed to be the end point, terminus. But he's not a terminus, but he does come along and he socializes and historicizes the mind. So, as I said before, the Hegelian idea that the I is the we and the we is the I is therefore, it's another radical jumping off point, or the terminus in philosophy. So the mind leaves the individual body and makes a journey across history. So for Hegel, therefore, and we'll continue next time, mind is history. And that's quite a claim, isn't it, really? That mind is history. That's what I think that Hegel's saying in this book. Now, I've skipped across Kant there, Numen and phenomenon. Numen is the thing in itself. I've got to correct myself. And phenomenon is what we see around us, like the greenness and the blueness of the sky, and, you know, your skin and stuff like that. But I won't go into that because it's just a nightmare if I have to go into just explaining Kant. And I'm looking at the time, and God, I've overrun 30 odd minutes. Okay, so see you next time, okay? And I forgot what we're doing next time, but it'll be probably, let's have a think. What are we going to do? What am I working on now? I'm doing the next part. So it's going to be, about like court life and about the Louis XIV. Okay, so see you next time. Ta-ra.